It's v.h.s.x. What do you mean?
Alright everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're reacting and having a discussion about a video from NanaPlaysGames titled "Why Does Dead by Daylight Have Such a Toxic Player Base?" So I'm interested in hearing another perspective on this topic because I already have many videos talking about the different aspects and the overall culture within the DBD community that I find to be very confusing as a DBD player. So
Dead by Daylight is not beginner friendly, not in the slightest. There's a lot to understand, it can be buggy or unfair, and there are constant updates that only further complicate things.
okay, right off the bat, 100% agree with that. That is 100% true. This game is very anti new player in a lot of ways, and first and foremost obviously is the tutorial. I think the tutorial really needs a lot of work. It definitely needs a lot of help. The tutorial does not teach you anything about the game besides what the controls are, and that's it. You're thrown basically into the ocean pretty much and being told sink or swim essentially, and unfortunately that is just more behavior at that point, just not creating a tutorial that can actually help new players. And unfortunately it's left to the community to actually teach new players as to what to do. Now there's two aspects to the new player experience obviously, and it's people who join the game to, you know, for the killers that they enjoy, and then people who join the game as horror fans that may be more interested in the survivor side. Now, as somebody who has coached new players in the past and to try to get them acclimated into the game, there's a couple of things that come into play. One, obviously, is understanding what they have to do, especially if they're starting off with killer, because I've coached specifically those people that started off and immediately it was a lot of discussion about who do you want to play on the killer side and where to begin. And from that in itself is a lot to talk about, right? Because each killer already has like a textbook worth of information that you can learn just immediately. And then on top of that is also, if you're on the survivor end, it's like what do the powers do so that you know how to counter it and how to actually loop and stuff like that. Now, between the two, I would still say that Survivor is objectively the more casual side, because you really aren't really having to be relied on for the entire outcome of the match. So, and this is obviously anecdotal, but still, going off of who I've coached before, a lot of the time they say killer is very stressful, pretty much not really for me. They ended up gravitating towards Survivor because you simply just have less to worry about, and it's a lot more casual in comparison to playing the killer, and especially because of the fact that they had a lot of negative experiences with trying to play killer because of the fact that it's very stressful, it's really very reliant on their ability, and then the people that they would go up against would not be very nice, obviously. Like they would you know, essentially make the player feel bad for just trying to learn. So, touching on to the main topic of the video, the player base definitely can be very toxic, especially when they're trying to have new players kind of jump in and then having to try to learn, and then the people that are also playing the game that are slightly more experienced are not even giving the new player any grace of any kind. They're not even going to give them any tips or anything on how to get better at the game. It's immediately straight to insults and telling them to uninstall, basically.
In order to get as good as I needed to be, understand as much as I needed to, I had to watch hours and hours of videos made by very talented YouTubers like Namedi, Ots, Puffalope, and others like them.
So to touch on what Nana is saying here, basically that's essentially what it boils down to. Like, unfortunately, a lot of people have joining the game are kind of forced to look up content if they actually want to improve. And I would even argue that's like the minority of the player base on Survivor, especially because they are most likely not going to want to actually improve at their game. And then I think that's what leads to a lot of toxicity, because then we see, good example, DVD Twitter, where they just kind of complain about everything instead of actually understanding why things work the way they do, and then cry for nerf on everything else. And that's not to say that the killers also don't have their own set of people that do that thing, but obviously because of just the amount of Survivor players, you're probably going to get at least 4 times more of them than you are going to get the 1. So
I also had to play basically every day, and I'm just so lucky my first year of university was as easy as it was, because that shit is not easy anymore. To some, adapting to the game may not be such a daunting task, but for most, I imagine it's a constant uphill battle. After coming back to the game, I just found it so annoying to try and figure out what the new killers were all about that I just started winging it. Trial and error can be your friend, but only if you, 1, kinda know what you're doing and if there's anything you need to do differently, and 2, know you're at least making progress.
honestly, I have to say that, in my opinion, that's the best perspective to have when you are playing on the Survivor side, is to really just kind of wing it, just kind of go with the flow and try to get a better understanding of what's going on. And in itself, I think could be fun, right? Because at the core of the game, it is a cat and mouse sort of experience. It's a lot like a horror movie in that kind of way. Like, you're trying to run, you're trying to get away from a monster, and just trying to get away, I think in itself is like what makes it kind of fun, and at least from my perspective. And for me personally, I would say that the chases to me is the most interesting aspect of the game. And to me, I think that if I could, I would just specifically just do that. And if I die, I die, you know what I mean? But it's like fun to be in the action and trying to kind of think on your feet, if you will, trying to make your next move and sort of be at the edge of your seat trying to make this next thing. And it's like, I think that in itself is exciting. Now, obviously not everybody shares that sort of perspective, of course. I think they want to focus more on just kind of filling the bar of the gen, or whatever else they like to do. But speaking for myself, that's what I preferred to do when I did play Survivor at the time. And I think having this perspective of just like, hey, at least the main focus is I'm just going to try to get used to it, just kind of see what it's about, I think is the best perspective. Because I think expecting to win every single game, and this applies to both sides, expecting to win every single game is just going to lead to a bad experience. Now, obviously everybody wants to win their games, but we also have to keep in mind that this is a game full of like random elements. Like, we really can get random teammates, you can get random killer, you can get random like tiles and maps, and tiles meaning like the different things that spawn into the map to use to try to like get away from the killer and stuff like that. All of that is pretty much random, so you really, it's sort of like a roguelike. You just kind of go in just like, hey, whatever I get is whatever I get. If I get unlucky, well, hey, I mean, it's not a lot you can do about it. So that's just an aspect of DVD I think that people should embrace a bit more. Now, can you win consistently though? Of course. And I think, to me, if you are able to win consistently, because it's so random, I think it does mean that you've definitely mastered what you've been trying to master, in a sense, or at least close to it.
Every killer is insanely unique and requires not only knowledge on how they work, but different playstyles. Running into, let's say, a doctor or spirit as a newbie can be really discouraging. Shit, running into a spirit now is discouraging. Anyway, it may seem like trying to understand the game and how it works isn't worth it. Beginner survivors aren't the only ones who may have a hard time, though. Killers all come with their frustrations and quirks, and it could take hundreds of hours to get good at playing the role. If you get into Dead by Daylight just to play your favorite antagonist like Springtrap, you're in for a very rude surprise. Killer in general requires a lot of strategy, thought, and on-the-spot decision-making that most newbies aren't at all prepared for. Shit, I'm not even ready for it whenever I play Killer once in a blue moon. That being said, this game is frustrating no matter if you're a rookie or a veteran. The amount
I 100% agree with that, and I think that's why a lot of new players sort of gravitate to Survivor every time they play DVD, because Killer really does require you to understand the game at a very deep level, in my opinion. At least if you're actually good at the Killer. Like, obviously, if you're just kind of going around and just hitting people willy-nilly and missing your hits and whatever example you can think of that involves like not really playing well, then I mean, of course, like, it's going to be a little bit different. But if we're talking about like both sides trying to win their game, I think you're going to have a lot more pressure as a killer player, because you're going to have to take down 4 different people with 4 different skill levels that all of them can easily be really terrible, or a lot of them can be really good. They could either be on comms and giving call outs to where you are, so you lose the element of surprise, which could also give them a very strong advantage depending on your killer. And this is a game of nuance, so obviously it's going to be difficult. It's definitely going to be difficult, and that's why I think, like I've said, I think a lot of new players gravitate to the easier of the two. If they enjoy the game, they're probably going to stick with the easier side to get into, which is just, you know, getting on the gen, la-di-da, save somebody, you know, get chased for a couple seconds, or maybe like about 30 or less, and then they go back to healing in the gens, you know. Very, very low pressure, very, very casual in that kind of way. Not really too intense in terms of actual gameplay, compared to like when you're playing killer, where you have to like micromanage all the gens. You got to know where they are and go do this and down this guy fast and then put this on and do this perk and then make sure this does its effects, you know.
The amount of information you have to retain in order for DBD to even be somewhat enjoyable is actually kind of crazy. This can lead to so many people becoming frustrated, which is totally understandable. Even knowing as much as you possibly can is not a fix-all, because the game is riddled with more bugs than the House of a Hoarders episode. That, paired with the enlightenment you have to obtain to understand how to play, can make it really, really easy to get tilted. The game requires players to play at their best or utilize their perks and environment to the best of their ability. The game isn't meant to be competitive, there's no ranked mode, but a lot of people play this game very seriously.
Yeah, that's honestly where there is a big divide in the DBD community. There may not be a ranked mode, and there may not be some kind of way to know what MMR you're at, but it still is a factor within the game because of the skill-based matchmaking that they added a while ago. And unfortunately, with that being added, it did create an environment where it is quite competitive in a lot of ways. And like I've said before, it's just within everybody's nature that they want to win a game. Like, they want to win regardless of what people want to admit. They want to win. Now, does the DBD community historically have a lot of Survivor players that are going to shame other killer players for trying to win the game? Of course. But at the end of the day, it's still true. Everybody wants to win. So with the addition of skill-based matchmaking, that really led to the very competitive, like, people kind of, you know, being able to kind of shift over to go against people that are also competitive in a perfect world, of course. Now, obviously, not in every case it really works like that. The matchmaking is still pretty random, so you may end up getting people of lesser skill or people of higher skill, depending where you're at, and you may not really understand as to why, but that's just kind of how matchmaking works. They kind of prioritize making the queue times quick, so you may end up getting a little bit of a mismatch. But that probably, if we're going to tie it back to why it's toxic, I mean, yeah, skill-based matchmaking is definitely there. And, you know, a lot of people are divided as to where it's a party game, but then it's not because there's skill-based matchmaking, because I'm pretty sure there's not really other party games that have that, or at least function that way. So it's very divided in a lot of ways, and I think that might also bring a lot of toxicity in the community, because of the fact that we end up getting a lot of like back and forth of this person believes that it's a party game, while this other person believes, hey, it's competitive because it's literally it's team versus team, like, or I guess technically person versus team, competing for a win in a skill-based matchmaking game. So therefore it is a competitive game because the people are competing to win, you know. So that also could answer the question as to why does it have such a toxic player base. It could be that too.
Of course, for a game like DBD that pits the two against each other, you're gonna have people who are a bit salty about their opposition. But this, in regard to how survivors and killers feel about each other, couldn't be more of an understatement. These two groups are so obsessed with pissing each other off and showing each other up that it's a bit strange. It's like both a dick measuring and rage baiting contest happening at the same exact time.
I do agree to some extent. The DBD community is filled with that. It's filled with the rage baiting, the the constant of competition of who can get somebody else more upset. And I think that just is sort of like a chicken and the egg kind of, or the egg kind of situation, where you don't really know where it originated from per se, but you know that it's just like it's there and it's apparent, like and it's kind of impossible to really stop at this point. I think it's snowballed into such a state where it's like, irregardless of how you decide to play, everybody else around you is still going to play in a way that is specifically to rage bait somebody else. I've spoken about this in a previous video talking about the DBD culture, and it's just this weird divide of like people wanting to win the game and then other people are playing casually, and then the people who play casually, quote unquote, are trying to shame people who want to win their games, which then inherently is hypocritical, because if they were casual, then they wouldn't care how somebody else would play because they're playing casually. So then they would just kind of go next into a new match or whatever have you and just play. So it's kind of like weirdly divided in that kind of way because of how people perceive the game. And there's just a lot of people that are going out of their way to just give everybody a bad experience. And then people kind of misunderstand some other people that just like want to win their game just because they're good at their characters and they just enjoy winning as their character they're good at, versus people that are actively trying to give people a bad experience. Like, those are just two different things, in my opinion.
A lot of survivors and killers straight up refuse to understand the other's point of view. If they are not winning with barely any effort on their part or as few hiccups as possible, they get insanely offended and take it very personally. There's a shit ton of entitlement oozing from both sides, and you don't need 10,000 hours in the game to see that. You get survivors who aim at nothing but to make the killer angry by running mean-spirited builds and maybe even using exploits. Then you have killers who do the same, but this usually involves tunneling, camping, and slugging for little to no reason. Now that's the thing that I want to touch on real quick, because survivors genuinely have and had used plenty of exploits in the past. Some that come to mind are Streetwise. Even earlier than that, like way back, it was when like people were able to go in, like clip into lockers so that they could not be hit. Another good example, I think, was the Made for This when it was in its heyday, like with just 3% for just being injured without, you know, the current version of it. Like, obviously, it's very easy to kind of point out the like that sort of like line of like exploited here, exploited here, exploited here. So, you know, that's on the survivor end. Now for killer, I don't think there's ever really been an exploit that was so blatantly like ridiculous that it was like it had to be immediately like patched out and was left in for multiple months at a time by any means at all. Now the only thing that I think could kind of come to mind was probably Skull Merchant, but she already got destroyed all the way to the ground, so that's pretty much non-existent. And I guess you could say the same thing about the other exploits too, but either way, that was more so behaviors incompetence, more so than the players, because obviously if it's in the game, it's going to get used. But I can understand why people sort of have a bad taste in their mouth when there has been a myriad of survivor exploits that get used and abused every single time it comes out. And then obviously on the other end, you also get, like, very rarely, but you do get occasionally a killer exploit, quote unquote. Oh yeah, and then the other time that there was technically an exploit is when Thrill the Hunt got buffed, but that got nerfed immediately, like a week later, so that really didn't last that long. So that would be the first thing I wanted to mention. The second part I want to mention is that we obviously understand that this creator is very survivor focused. As they mentioned earlier, they do not play any killers. So they're saying that they're, you know, we're gonna hear it again just to make sure we heard it correctly. The killer angry by running mean-spirited builds and maybe even using exploits. Then you have killers who do the same, but this usually involves tunneling, camping, and slugging for little to no reason.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, they are claiming that tunneling and camping and slugging or whatever have you are exploits. If I'm hearing it correctly, I'm going to make sure I hear it again.
You have killers who do the same, but this usually involves tunneling, camping, and slugging for little to no reason. Now, things like tunneling and camping can be legit strats, but I almost never run into killers who do it because they need to. It's usually because they're angry I've looped them for more than 10 seconds. Some situations can
So I do want to disagree with that point, obviously. Now, are there cases where killers will just tunnel for just for the mere fact? I mean, probably, right? I think there's a chance of that occurring. I would definitely say that much. But that would obviously mean that they're going after the same survivor, pretty much only that survivor. Because if that's what we're saying is tunneling, right? Like that's usually what people are referring to when they say tunneling. That mean that they would only be going after that survivor. They will not be hooking anybody else at any point in the match, and then end up throwing, right? They just get one kill, they lose, blah blah blah. So the thing, and this has always been like a hot topic, I would say, when talking about killer specifically and DVD and in general, is like in some instances it's acknowledged as a strategy. Like, look, you pursue the same target because you need somebody out of the game at a certain point, and then right after that, in the same breath, they say, "Oh, but it's an exploit now." And it's like, those are not the same things. Like, because if we're really considering exploits, like things that are in the game that can be used and are uncounterable. So, for example, like Streetwise back before that, made for this. And if we're talking about like the totems or like Skull Merchant in that sense, I would consider those as game exploits, right? Because they're added in the game to be used for whatever intention, but there would happen to be some kind of aspect that they missed that then the players used to gain free advantages and wins. But tunneling doesn't even do that because it doesn't guarantee you a win compared to Streetwise, that was like infinite items, so you could essentially have a toolbox and just fill up the gen like at least 30% to 50% faster without having any way to stop it. Or if we're considering the fact that Skull Merchant pretty much was able to lock down a 3-gen, pretty much making it impossible for anybody to actually win their game. I wouldn't say that like tunneling or even anything of that sort of category even comes close to that. If I were to use the definitions that I would say make the most sense in terms of what is considered an exploit, what is considered a strategy, whatever have you. Now, I do also hear that as well. I want to touch on that section. They say without any reason. Now, are there, like I've said before, there are cases where players are just going after one person, don't kill anyone else, they just want that one person. Hey, that makes sense. Cool. If you see that, just do the objective. Just hopefully that the person is able to hold their own, because if the survivor is able to hold their own, you're going to pretty much guarantee that you can finish the objective instantly. But if the survivor that is getting pursued specifically and nobody else is getting pursued is unable to hold their own, then I think at that point it becomes a issue on their end, because if they don't have the experience to be able to hold their own against a killer, especially in consideration with the multitudes of things that they have in their kit, you know, map size, palette density, perks you can bring, stuff like that. Especially you can even use Windows of Opportunity if you need any help finding palettes in Windows. We also have just perks like Off the Record and Decisive Strike, Dead Hard, and things like that for after being hooked and stuff like that. And with those combined, I mean, you can pretty much hold your own pretty well, I would say. And then at that point, if they continue to pursue that survivor and they're still able to hold their own, at that point, then the killer might lose. So that's sort of where I disagree in that sense. Like, I wouldn't say that tunneling, slugging, and camping are not exploits. That's not a thing. They are valid strategies. And the reason is because 9 times out of 10, even though the indicator on the left says, oh, it's 5 gens, you walk past 3 and they're all 99. You're like, well, now I'm at 2. So I'm like, I need somebody out of the game. Now, this is more applicable to lower tiers, especially because they lack a lot of map traversal. They're not really able to have a lot of map presence. And that in itself, I go, hey, it makes complete sense. As somebody who mains like lower tier killers, like strategy is pretty much what we need to do. It's pretty much the only way we can hold our own in a lot of ways, because if we don't have any teleporting or map traversal or any sort of chase power, we're pretty much going to have to get somebody out of the game as soon as possible in order to be able to create a 3v1 and have a much more manageable experience than having to deal with 4 people that can all do the gens at the same time, or I'm after one person and then 3 others can rush the gen, or whatever combination of situations you could think of.
Some situations can seem downright unwinnable or even unfair, and in that case, I definitely understand being angry.
So I do understand that. I do understand, like, from both perspectives, that if the survivor that was getting chased out was pretty bad, and you end up just kind of in a 3v1 situation, that it may feel terrible to go up against, but I think that it kind of goes that way for both sides of the spectrum here. Like, if you're playing a killer and you have a pretty okay chase and you end up losing 2 to 3 gens, it does feel pretty terrible. Because half of the game is over and you probably end up losing about a couple gens. Now, there is nuance here. Like, there's either A, the survivor that they were going up against was experienced, right? In terms of killer, right? The survivor that they were chasing was pretty experienced. They didn't break off chase. They weren't playing strategically. They weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And letting go of the chase. On the other hand, if the killer is able to down that survivor quickly, for whatever reason, it could either be like they were just in a bad area, or they just were not good at the game, and then they were ended up getting killed immediately for their own mistakes and blundering. Either way, it's gonna feel terrible, right? Because if the killer is going against the experienced player and losing a bunch of gens, feels bad. If the survivors have a bad teammate and they end up getting chased out, killed, that feels bad for them. It kind of goes both ways. It's sort of how winning goes. You're going to end up losing something. And honestly, like at the end of the day, like, as it may feel bad, but the player that is getting tunneled, quote unquote, should have to take that as a learning experience to go, you know, I probably should learn from the experience, see where I went wrong. Or if they were actually just good at the chase, but say their teammate used the pallet, you go, well, you just gotta just be like, all right, well, that's fine. Like, my teammate used the pallet, so it's not really your own fault at that point per se, because if there was no resource because your teammate just used it, then it really just depends on, like, were you able to get away and go to a new area with the resource, or was it that you just, like, didn't know that the resource was gone? Like, there's a lot of nuance with this, and that's why I feel like it's so hard to definitively say, like, it's a skill issue, but it can be. In a lot of cases, it can be. It goes both ways. It can be a skill issue. And that's why I've stated in the past that getting tunneled is a bit of a skill issue, because if you're not really taking the time out to go to a safe area in some cases, or if you are getting chased again, then, and you aren't able to hold your own because of your lack of knowledge and skill, then it goes both ways, right? Like, it can literally go in either direction.
Take my boyfriend Jay's account for example, since he plays killer more than I do. He played 2 matches, one as Pig and one as Ghostface. He didn't tunnel, camp, or slug during these matches, and because the survivors were efficient and really messed up, he lost. When Jay started tunneling though, the matches became infinitely easier and he almost never lost. I'll talk about tunneling and slugging a little later, but the fact that the game can push you into playing like this is bad for reasons I'll explain also later.
Well, hopefully I can offer a little bit of nuance for this. I think people forget that skill-based matchmaking exists. And so what that means is if you are going into a match and you do not have any experience, or you have a low amount of hours or a low amount of experience, you're going to also go up against players that are also have a low amount of experience and have a low amount of hours. Or if they do have a good amount of hours, they just actively are not winning. So what the system essentially does is try to pair you with people that are at similar skill, if you will. So it'll put you against people that have that sort of same level of experience. It's not perfect, but a lot of the time it'll try to do that. Now, the thing is, and that this is what people don't really understand about why tunneling and all this type of stuff is effective, is that a lot of the time you may go up against players that are unable to counter it. And the reason I say that is because when I'm playing killer, right? I've gone against plenty of people that understand how to counter it. Like, tunneling is not the end-all be-all. It's not going to automatically win you every single game, because if that were true, the kill rates would be skyrocketing right now, right? If that were true, then Ghostface would be just as strong as anybody else, right? Because if tunneling was so powerful and so immensely incredibly strong, he wouldn't be a garbage tier killer. He would just be right up at next to the A tiers. And the same thing with Pig as well. And using this as an example is a bit flawed only because it lacks that extra nuance of skill-based matchmaking exists, therefore you may go against lower level like players if you're new to the game, or if you are just like not really winning too many games or whatever have you. So that nuance is there.
For Survivor, there's a few things I can list that makes the experience pretty annoying. Survivors cannot communicate with each other outside of basic emotes unless you happen to be playing in a Swift and are calling on Discord. This is actually a good thing because a lot of people would get banned the first week if voice chat got added. Even so, survivors can't talk to each other, so you might be sitting on hook waiting for the other 3, or god forbid, 7 survivors to get you just for you to die on hook.
So that right there I want to touch on as well. First and foremost, Behavior said that they are never going to add any voice chat. So that's good for either side. Secondly, besides that aspect, that this experience that's being described is what we call a solo queue experience, which once again, I always use to explain that a lot of the time it's not really the killer that's powerful per se, but it's always the fact that your teammates' lack of skill or lack of knowledge will probably cause you to die a lot more than a killer themselves. And that's just because of solo queue. A lot of the time they maybe just aren't experienced by any means. They may unhook in a bad spot, they may unhook next to the killer, they may farm you is what they call it, or they just don't, I don't know, like a lot of the time they're just not looking at the HUD, like even though the information is there. And mind you, the HUD tells you who's being chased, who's on a chest, who's on a totem, who's on a gen, who's healing. Like the HUD tells you everything. So the fact of the matter is like I think they just like those players that leave others on hooks are just either unaware solo queued players, or they're just not paying attention, which in itself is a bad experience, and that is a part of the experience. And unfortunately, that's just how solo queue works, obviously. But at the end of the day, I think that's more of a survivor issue, like, but within their own players that need to just look at the damn HUD. Because the HUD is there, like it tells you literally everything about the match. So I don't really understand why that happens. Like you think it would be even better for the solo queues because you can see everything, but even now it does absolutely nothing. And that is also why I wanted to touch a little bit on the PTB changes, because those PTB changes are not going to solve the solo queue problem, especially when the lack of awareness is not going to help them. Unless they put like some like big blocks of text and sirens and alarms, like, you know, going off, like just to tell them save the person, or like they stop them from working on the gen to save you or something. Like that's the only thing that's probably gonna work on them, because they're just in La La Land, like looking at the sky, touching totems, opening chests, like instead of saving anybody. So that's just how it is, unfortunately.
This happened to me twice in a row during a 2v8 match, and no one was doing anything. Brain dead survivors, especially in solo queue, can make you a little worried that these people can vote. So imagine doing everything right during a match. You're on gens whenever possible, loop the killer for a decent amount of time, and go for saves, and are all around a really good teammate just for everyone else to not do that. Again, Dead by Daylight can be a lot all at once, so to be doing everything correctly and still lose because of something out of your control is far from joy-inducing. It's one thing to not be the best player ever, but the decisions some survivors make can end a game before it's even truly started. For example, if a teammate is getting tunneled in solo queue, gen progression does not need to stop. The world's gonna keep spinning, it's not that serious. Optimally, only one person should be off the gen trying to help the other survivor, while the other 2 should just continue doing the objective.
I'd argue even 3 people would be on separate gens to be even more optimal, if you will, because if the player is getting either tunneled or camped or whatever have you, that is the perfect opportunity to push the gens even harder, because that means that they're not on you. That means that they're not going to chase any of y'all. So all you have to do is just push the gens faster. Like, and I think that's where like that sort of distinction kind of comes in. Like, you hear that a lot on DB Twitter, you hear that a lot, and I'm using this as sort of like a springboard for another point. You hear this a lot where it's like, oh, the game is so killer sided, but then it's like you look at the HUD and not a single survivor is on a gen. Like, it's so killer sided, but then not a single soul is doing their objective. They're not trying to like counter the killer with anything. Like, say if it's Sadako, they're not picking up tapes that take less than a second to pick up. Oh, it's so killer sided, but then they get down in 2 seconds. It's like, okay. But did you use that window there that was connected to that pallet that also connected to Shack? Oh no, okay. So then why are you going down in 2 seconds? You have resources you can use. Like, you have the Shack connected to this thing, or you have this window in main, and you have this thing also connected. Like, just use your eyeballs. Like, you know what I mean? Use your eyes. Like, okay, vault here. Okay, there's a TNL there. Vault that. Okay, go around it. See how much time I can buy so that my team can do the objective. So at the end of the day, I think it's I think people's teammates kill them even more than killers do at this point.
This does not always happen, unfortunately. A lot of survivors, especially solo queue ones, become so frazzled whenever they experience a tunneling killer that they make silly mistakes and bad choices that are honestly worse for their team than the fact the killer is tunneling.
This is what I 100% agree with, and that's why I usually lean towards the fact that there's a skill issue going on most of the time, I would say. Because they don't necessarily have to follow around the killer at all. Like, if the survivor is experienced and then they can hold their own, they probably don't really need the help. Unless they get like a good timed body block where they're about to go down and somebody flies in and takes a body block and extends the chase even further. Then I would say that would make sense, but then you go back to, like, you also have other people on the objective while you do that. Now, obviously, these are things that are applicable more to people in teams with comms, but either way, you know, I would say that if you are playing solo queue, I wouldn't say there's like a good chance you're really going to win that often, because of the fact that there's a lack of communication and the fact that, like, on average, you might get just like bad teammates.
And these things go unaddressed. Survivors will not reflect on what to do to ensure tunneling isn't a game ender in the future. They instead just think tunneling is completely unacceptable in any situation. There are going to be things that survivors or killers do that are simply optimal, even if the other side dislikes it. Tunneled or camped sucks a lot, but you can't deny that it's the optimal way to play, no matter if you're winning the game or not.
I want to touch on this point because every time I played Survivor, I personally wanted to be tunneled. Like, I wanted to be chased. Because to me, being on the gen and healing and unhooking is boring. I want to be chased. So whenever I was able to actually be tunneled or at least be chased, it was pretty hype. I was like, finally, like, I can actually, like, you know, use the knowledge I've learned from watching guide videos from Mr. Taterhead and stuff like that, and I can actually apply it to a match for once, and it was cool. But I know not everybody shares that, but at least for me, when I did play, hell yeah, like, that was where it's at. I'm like, I want to be able to see how well I can hold my own.
Finally hooking the first survivor of the game in 3 gens pop, though, is also not a great feeling for killer, but is optimal for survivors. In both situations, you are simply speeding through objectives regardless of how the side you're playing against feels about it. To be fair, though, it's easier for the killer to play optimally than it is for survivors due to there being more solo queue survivors than the ones playing in a Swift. Killers only need the cooperation of themselves to play this way, while survivors need each other's cooperation but won't typically get it if they're not playing in a Swift. Despite lack of communication not being solo queue survivors' fault, I have found myself getting so insanely angry at what some of these survivors have been doing that I have to sit in silence and recollect myself before I keep playing because, like, am I really getting this mad over a game? Completing objectives faster to minimize hiccups is the optimal way to play and should be what both sides aim to achieve.
I appreciate Nana here, like, showing us this example, because this is the example that I would use myself. This is exactly what I'm referring to when I'm talking about solo queue. Like, as you can see, someone's in chase and this Fung Min is just not doing anything. Not on a gen, not on a like not doing anything to help the team whatsoever, pretty much. while the two other people are having to do the gen. And like this is where I say, like, it's really not the killer per se at that point. It's your teammates. Like, your teammates are the bigger killer.
I get mad at harmless things like this, but I definitely get it, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So you can of course say, don't play like you're having the worst day of your life, but like I mentioned before, there are things that can be seen as rude but are also optimal for players to do. Tunneling and camping hooks and gens is optimal for killers, while gen rushing and prolonging chase for as long as possible is optimal for survivors. The real problem is that neither side tries to understand each other and then calls these ways of playing toxic. They definitely—
Thank you so much, man. I'm just so happy that this creator mentions that, because we need more creators like this that are able to point out both sides like a lot more frequently. I'm so happy to hear this, because it's 100% true. It's 100% accurate. It's just how the game is played. Unfortunately, it's just about it's a game of efficiency. Like, whoever can do their objective quicker is going to come out on top, probably most of the time. For killer, if you can get somebody out of the game as soon as possible, you're going to have a much better chance compared to you know, with survivor. Like, if you can complete the objective a lot quicker than anything, of course it's going to work out for you as well. Like, these are things that would, you know, kind of keep the game going. So people getting mad about it is really not going to solve anything. It just sort of comes with the territory. It's really just how the game functions. It's how the game works. With that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you want to watch the original video, it'll be linked in the description. Go ahead and watch the rest. And I want to know you guys' thoughts in the comments section. Do you guys agree or disagree with the points being made in the video? Let me know what you guys think. And I will see you guys in the next one. Check out the links to support the channel. Consider following on TikTok and Twitch to watch me play Kill Live. And yeah, have a good one.